What's happening, everybody? The lazy SEC sticking with 8 conference games in 2025, and they're not even changing opponents. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yeah, what is happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. Thanks for joining us. On today's show, we're going to discuss the SEC sticking with 8 conference games in 2025. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. We're free and available. Everydayers, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And by the way, this episode is brought to you by Nissan. If you're the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further, ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner, take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Go check them out today at nissanusa.com. Joining us is our buddy Chris Marler. You know him. You love him. He's been suspended from Twitter not once, but twice. And now he's got a new Twitter account. He's at Vern Funquist CFB. So see if you could find him, and we'll see how long he can hang on to this Twitter handle. Marler, how the hell are you? Welcome in.
It's a spring tradition now. It's like the Masters or pollen. It's just like it's every single spring I'm going to lose my Twitter for joking around and saying something that I probably shouldn't have said. But yeah, man, good to be back. I'm running out of variations of Vern Funquist, so that's the main concern.
I could hear Jim Nance now. Hello, friends. It's
yeah,
like no other. It's Chris Marler getting suspended by Twitter. Man, we got to dive right into this because I was pretty shocked when I saw this yesterday, and I think it was Alex Scarborough and John Talty kind of broke it first, and then it kind of went from there. But the news coming out that the SEC is going to stick with 8 conference games in 2025. I heard this was on the table, but I didn't want to believe it. All the rumblings of a couple years ago when we hear Texas and Oklahoma are coming to the conference, but you know, there were the proposals out there. Look, a 9-game conference works symmetrical with 16 teams because you have your team, you have 3 permanent rivalries. That's the big thing. Greg Sankey's always preaches, want to preserve those rivalries or games of passion, as he called them to me. But and then the other 6 rotate, and every 4 years you would have a chance where you go to every venue in the conference, because that's the whole point of a freaking conference is playing each other, right? Well, instead, because of money and greed and all that stuff, the SEC is going to stick with 8 games again. And that wasn't that shocking, Marler. Like, okay, well, we'll get to 9 eventually. But the shocking thing is they announced we're going to keep the same opponents. Who you play in 2024, you're going to play again in 2025. It's just going to flip home and away. Like, that to me is absolutely absurd.
So I disagree that it's absurd. I've long been a proponent of staying at 8 games because here's the thing: we all have a favorite team, right? We're all fans of somebody. You know what I love watching when my team? I love watching big games. You know what I really love to watch with my team is winning. I love to watch my team win. And if you're in this conference, I'm not saying that I think they're going to go to 9 at some point. But in the meantime, what is the reason to go to 9? Like, are you going to get peer pressured by the Big Ten because they're doing it, or because the Big 12 is doing it? How's that worked out? And like prior to this year, the SEC had won 13 of the last 17 national championships. Like, you know, 2 of those or 3 of those actually, the loser was also from the SEC, right? So it's like the ones they didn't win. I'm sorry, in 3 of those games.
Let me answer that question for you. One, the fans would love it because do we really enjoy watching Alabama play the Citadel and South Florida? I mean, like, you add some better game. Another SEC games makes another competitive game that you actually want to win.
It also adds another loss. And if you are, I think at some point they're going to go to this, but I think that part of this is the fact that Sankey, there's no reason for the SEC to do it. There's just not. Like, and I hate to say this, we're all fans, like I said, and we would love to see these big games. I think we're going to get a ton of really, really good games, even with an 8-game conference schedule this year. However, none of this is about the fans. No part of what is happening in college football in general or in the SEC is about the fans. And it sucks to say that, but it's painstakingly true. And we see it. Every single decision that's made, it seems like, is further and further away from things that the fans would want to see. So I would say wave bye-bye to that, like right off the bat. The other thing I'll say is this. The thing that I think Sankey's doing the most here with the 8-game conference schedule, and also not switching anything up, right? Like they're just going to do the inverse of the schedule. The home games this year will be away games next year, and vice versa. What that tells me, and if you look at the track record of Greg Sankey, think about COVID here in 2020. You had all these different conference commissioners that were like rushing to be the first to say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to get these games here, we're going to cancel the season, whatever. Sankey just kind of waited and got more information every single day. This decision to not do anything drastic with the schedule as for next year tells me that in 2026 something drastic is probably going to happen, and it's probably going to be more expansion. It's probably going to be more teams like leaving, especially the ACC, and then they'll make a change then. But right now, there's no reason to.
Well, you're seeing the groundwork's already been laid with the Florida State and Clemson both suing the ACC. Well, let's lay out the timetable here too, because people forget this. So the SEC signed this $1 billion deal with ESPN. We got rid of CBS Sports. They signed this deal a couple years ago with ESPN, where all your games are going to be either on ESPN, ABC, SEC Network, ESPN2, the whole family of networks. The problem was ESPN, Greg Sankey and the SEC signed that contract. A few months later, the SEC announces we're adding Texas and Oklahoma.
Right.
So the SEC, the whole thing is, and Greg Sankey has preached this with me before in the past when I've had him on. The biggest challenge with SEC football is schedule inequity, and that's been my biggest gripe. Is there have been years where in the East-West, like LSU has had to play Georgia and Florida in the East, and Bama had Tennessee and Vandy, and that was when Tennessee was god awful. So Bama had a clearer path. They had an easier path to get to Atlanta and get to national championship, whereas LSU loaded, but hey, you lost 2 games and sorry, you had a tougher road and you're out. So but I'm fine with that, but it's got to be cyclical. It's got to change. Then you got a brutal schedule this year. Hey, next year gets easier. Like, it's got to be like that. And on top of it, I want to see you like us go to venues we haven't been in forever. And that's the biggest problem for me, is that Georgia in the year of our Lord 2024 has never been to Kyle Field. Like, it's absolute insanity. And it's going to be again 2025. They're not going. Like, how long are we going to do this where we're calling ourselves a conference and we have teams not going to venues?
Well, I'll tell you what, too. I brought this up last year when I was looking at some of the future scheduling with I think there was something that happened last summer, and it was Florida's schedule came out, and that's the first time I saw like the gauntlet they're going to have this year, right, in 2024. And a lot's been made out of that schedule and how difficult it is. I'm sure most of your listeners already know what that's like. They're playing like 11 Power 5 teams, right? So then I think Saban made a comment last year, like, well, he wanted to stay at 8 games instead of 9 or whatever, and that got a whole bunch of traction and attention, all that kind of stuff. So before Texas and Oklahoma were announced, there were 4 teams in the SEC that went out and scheduled multiple Power 5 opponents in the same season, and it was Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, and Alabama, and that is for the next 5 to 10 years. There's other teams like A&M is going to play Notre Dame. Even though they're independent, LSU is going to play USC. They got and UCLA. Georgia's going to UCLA next year. But those teams are the only ones that set up multiple Power 5 opponents in the non-con schedule for 5 years, and then the 4 I mentioned are the ones that set up for 10 years. So for the next 10 years, I mean, maybe you're going to be able to get out of some of those games. But man, if you're Georgia and you've gone out and you've picked up like a road game at Texas in the same year that you got to go, to the Rose Bowl out like against UCLA, or you're going to play I think Florida State's going to be on Bama and Georgia's schedule, stuff like that. Clemson for Georgia as well. Like, what is the benefit to doing that? Because if you end up with 2 losses in the SEC, you're going to have a lot of like a bottleneck here, I think, at the top of that conference. And you're talking about only getting 3 to 4 teams in the playoff. What's the benefit of losing if like a good loss? This isn't the NCAA tournament. Like having a good non-con loss doesn't matter.
Well, I'll say this: if you're scared, get a dog, because that's what a lot of people like. Because that's what we heard from the Kentuckys and the South Carolinas. We're like, well, we play South Carolina's like, we play Clemson. We can't. We have to have our 4 non-conference teams, because if we only go down to 3,
Right.
now we got to play 6 SEC schools, or like we got to play 9 SEC schools and Clemson. We might lose. Oh my God! Like, how dare? And then same thing with Kentucky. Like, well, we got Louisville every year. Well, that's on you. You created that rivalry. Like, you're scared of Louisville. Say you're scared. Like, it's those schools that are looking at, I got my 4 non-conference, and those are my easy cupcakes. And then all I got to do is win 2 SEC games, and I'm 6-6, and I'm golden, and I'm not going to get fired. Like, those are the conversations that I hate. And to go back what I was saying earlier with the deal that they signed with ESPN is Greg Sankey said after we expanded, he went back to ESPN and said, or ESPN said, hey, you guys going to go to 9 conference games now? And Greg Sankey said, oh yeah, we'd love to. Pay us for it. And ESPN said, well, no, we just signed $1 billion deal with you. He goes, no. We signed $1 billion deal for 8 conference games. You want 9, you got to pay more. Yeah. And that's what I've heard. ESPN's like, we don't have it. We gave you $1 billion. Right. We don't have that money.
You're paying Pat McAfee an arm and a leg.
Yeah. And so this is the SEC kicking the can down the field. But like, again, like, you want to stick with 8 in 2025. I get it. But dude, at least switch it up and play the teams you didn't play. Keeping the same opponents is going to help some teams and hurt some others.
And here's the other thing I'll say, and pushing back on that just a little bit, because I understand that people want to see it. And like, you can make the case either or for some of these teams like that you mentioned, like Kentucky, Mississippi State, South Carolina. But I feel like, you have a little bit lower of a ceiling for those schools because of the fact that, like, it was already tough enough for them to get to a certain number of wins. And now you got Texas and OU coming in. But you're talking about how they wanted to get those 4 non-con wins because you only needed 2 SEC wins to get to 6-6. Is that even going to matter anymore? Like with the 14-team playoff, like, is that even going to matter if you get bowl eligible? Because like the bowls are getting more and more devalued by the day. Oh, sorry, the dogs say hello. But the last thing I'll also tell you is this. If you're in the Big Ten, you're saying, hey, like, they need to play 9 games. They need to play 9 games. Like, you guys are in control of your schedule too. You can play 8 games. This isn't high school. You don't need to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. If you want to play 8 games, play 8 games.
Well, and I'm with you on that. I just think, that's the big gripe we hear from the Big Ten schools too, is that, all these other conferences like, we play 9. Why can't you guys play 9? Again, I'm with you that it's the SEC not trying to add another loss. I just come at it from the standpoint of, if we're going to call ourselves a conference, let's be a damn conference and let's play each other, because we got some, and we'll get to it in the next segment, but there are some teams that have an absolutely brutal draw in 2024. And even though we're switching home to away, it's still a brutal draw in 2025. And then you got some other teams where they're avoiding some of the big dogs and they avoid the big dogs again because the schedule doesn't change. We're going to talk about that with Chris Marler here in just a second. More here on Locked On SEC coming your way right after this. But first, I want to remind you guys, this episode is presented to you by our friends over at Nissan. Look, this week's March Madness bracket highlight brought to you by Nissan. Each week, we are picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. And today we're talking about the Auburn Tigers. They can be compared to the Pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch, have created a lane for themselves after claiming the top spot in the SEC with winning the championship on Sunday. And they knocked off the Florida Gators. They are set to make a big run in the NCAA tournament. And Auburn, very much a Pathfinder. So go take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada, and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com to check out all the great vehicles from Nissan. This episode also presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Say goodbye to your busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it is time to go dancing at America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet doesn't win. It's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. You just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Bet on the college hoops as they continue to cut down the nets. And again, best part is, if your bracket is busted after this first round this weekend, FanDuel, you can go back and continue to make bets and continue to be on the action. I know so many people that come Monday after the tournament, they're ripping up their bracket going, I'm done. I'm not even checking this thing anymore. FanDuel.com lets you keep playing and keep getting in on the action. Again, go to that website. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get in on the tournament action today. All right, we dive back into it with our buddy Chris Marler, who joins us to discuss a little bit more on this news of the SEC sticking with an 8-game conference schedule and not changing opponents. We're going to stay with the same teams you're playing in 2024. You're just going to play the home teams on the road and vice versa. And Marler, as we take a look at the schedules, just a few that kind of jumped out at me. The one I look at first and foremost is Missouri. Eli Drinkwitz coming off of a 10-win season. He brings back Brady Cook. They're at, Luther Burden. They're still loaded. They have a really good chance. We're breaking down the schedule the other day of getting 10 wins again this year because the schedule sets up well for them. Well, this schedule in 2024 flips to 2025. Yes, they get Bama, but instead of going to Bama this year, they will host Bama in 2025, and then they'll host Mississippi State in transition under Jeff Levy, South Carolina, who Shane Beamer, very well could be on the hot seat by then. At Texas A&M, we don't know what Mike Elko will look like in year 2. But look at their road games. At Arkansas, winnable. At Auburn, winnable. At Vanderbilt, absolutely winnable. And at Oklahoma, basically, Bama, A&M, and Oklahoma are their toughest games. Like, Missouri avoids Ole Miss. They avoid LSU. They avoid Georgia. I just look at this and go, God, Eli Drinkwitz, if you haven't bought more property in Como yet, load up because you ain't going anywhere. You've got 10-win seasons coming for the next couple years.
Yeah, I think the one thing with me is I think when they added Texas and OU, it seemed like the foregone conclusion was, well, there's not going to be any more easy conference like schedules anymore, right? Like everyone's going to have to play someone, and you're not going to have like this griping, kind of like you mentioned earlier with all right, like this team in the East had got an easy crossover schedule, blah blah blah. Then you gotta peel it back a little bit. You see Ole Miss, you see Mizzou, hell, you see Texas, man, and you're like, man, that's very different than some of these other schedules. I like Florida. A lot's been made of that because of a lot that has to do with their non-conference and their road schedule for this year. But man, like next year, like this again, it doesn't really convince, I think, ADs and head coaches especially. Hey, you know what? I really should start scheduling some of these non-con matchups because I'm already having to go play this team and this team and this team. And like you said, I thought the one thing that was going to be absent from the new SEC was going to be the schedule inequities, and it's not. And I tell you what though, we're kind of picking on Mizzou because Mizzou is good now. Like in the past, this is something that I've always said Mizzou is they're Vandy with a fake ID, man. Like they have struggled a ton in the conference, and I think they're a good team. From last year, I think they're going to be a good team this next year. But like that is not an argument we would have made in the past. The only reason we're probably making is because they won 11 games last year. Good for Drinkwitz. Like that program probably needed a break.
Well, we talk about how it sets up better for Mizzou. You mentioned Ole Miss. Yeah, they get home games against LSU, Florida, Arkansas, South Carolina. They do have to go to Georgia, which is brutal. At Oklahoma will be tough, but at Kentucky and at Mississippi State are manageable. Again, it's potential 10-win seasons for Lane Kiffin. He just won 10 this year. He could win 10, in 2024, and he could win 10 in 2025. But I want to flip the other side. How about Alabama? Alabama's got a tough schedule this year. We're talking about year 1 for Kalen DeBoer and how brutal it could be. But look at what 2025 will be. You get LSU, Oklahoma, and Tennessee at home, but those are still 3 behemoths, that traditionally top 25 teams, at least in the recent years. Like you're talking about Nico Iamaleava being, in his second year as a starter. LSU will probably be, moving on to a new quarterback post Nussmeier, unless Nussmeier comes back. Jackson Arnold is going to be a full-time starter this year. He'll be in year 2 at Oklahoma. Vanderbilt, should be a win. But then look at the road trip for Bama. On the road at Auburn in the Iron Bowl, at Georgia, at Missouri, who we just talked about is getting better, and at South Carolina. So it's like Bama's got a tough schedule 2024. Guess what, Bama? You get another tough schedule 2025. And it's, for Kalen DeBoer, he's going, hey, man, you couldn't flip this up. You couldn't throw us a Mississippi State or somebody a little bit easier in year 2.
Yeah, it's always funny to me because I think there's just been so much low-hanging fruit, bad, ignorant takes about Alabama during the Saban years because people want to discount how much they won. And one of those things was, Bama doesn't play anybody. And that's a lot because of they would play that cupcake game. And here's the thing, man, almost everyone in the SEC plays that. I don't know why, but since it's Bama, since they were playing Mercer, I don't know why it's Mercer and the Citadel are the ones that are always brought up. But what's wild about that is this. Nobody's going to feel bad for Alabama, and I don't think anyone should feel bad for Alabama because of the schedule. It's everyone. There's a lot of teams in here that are going to have a difficult schedule. The placing of some of these games is the concern. Yeah. You've had that cupcake week like almost everyone in the conference has had for several years now, and now you're going to have a schedule where, hey, we got to go to Jordan here, or we finish the season with Auburn, and hey, right before that, Bama, you're going to have to go play Oklahoma on the road at Oklahoma. That's a very difficult slate. I mean, Florida's November is insane. But here's the other thing. Like this is what I was trying to bring up earlier about some of these teams getting screwed. Like you look at do you know Bama's non-con for next year? Because you brought up like, oh, they don't want to see the South Florida game. How about South Florida game last year was one of the best played games that they had, arguably. South Florida, some people have them. I think Brad Crawford from 247 thinks they might make the actual playoff as the highest rated G5 school. But this year they're playing at Wisconsin. Next year, man, they open at Doak against Florida State. They get Wisconsin at home, and then they have that 8-game schedule with SEC teams.
Yeah, again, and I get the non-conference, slate, and that is still a requirement, by the way. Greg Sankey and the SEC are still requiring you to play a tough or a Power 5 team, right? Like you still have to, but that you got for every LSU going to play USC in Vegas this year, you got Ole Miss is going on the road at Wake Forest. Like that's their
Kiffin he has beaten this system. So like it's not even that sneaky. Like his idea of like, hey, listen, we're gonna play a tough road game. It's like, hey, it's a Power 5 team on the road at Georgia Tech 2 years ago, at Wake Forest this year. Then they play not a Power 5 team. They go on the road against Tulane last year. So it's like, hey, look at the schedule, man. That's not that bad. Like he's really figured it out.
Before we close the door on this, sorry, not Greg Sankey. As you look at it, does anybody get a bet? Like, is there anybody that you look at the schedule 2024 and go, man, that's a tough road slate, but it flips in 2025 and they get the tougher games at home? Like the only one I can look at is like Florida. They still have to go at LSU, at Ole Miss, at A&M, and at Kentucky, but and Georgia's the neutral field, but they get Tennessee and Texas in the swamp. So I mean, if you got to play those two, at least you get them at home. But like, is there anybody's schedule that jumps out to you, goes, all right, at least it's doable getting those tougher games at home than on the road?
And so the one main one is Georgia. But here's the thing too. Ole Miss is a tough game just because they're going to be a good team. Playing at Vaught Hemingway is not a tough environment. Right. Like you got 60,000 Vineyard Vine models out there just in Patagonia vests. Like, come on. So that's not what makes that game difficult. But man, Georgia going from I think a lot of Georgia fans probably thought they kind of got screwed over going into this season because you're on the road at Bama and then you play on the road at Texas. And you get Ole Miss, and that Ole Miss game is a game that they haven't really played consistently at all since the last, what do you call it, expansion in 2012. Now you get to play them 3 years in a row. But I think Georgia's schedule, I think, is the one that stands out the most, from away games that are difficult to home games that are like a lot more fun, not manageable, but like bigger. And I like that for Georgia, strictly because, they've gone undefeated in SEC play 3 straight years, or like in the regular season 3 straight years. But man, like how many times have you seen a big Georgia game and it's a 12 o'clock start? Like last year's like the first time they had like decent night games in forever.
Yeah. Well, you look at Auburn will be tough because that game was just tough this past year.
Yeah.
But at Tennessee will be tough. At Mississippi State, we'll see what Jeff Lebby looks like. But yeah, getting Bama, Ole Miss, Texas, and Kentucky, all tough opponents, but you get them at home. I think that does make it a little bit better. But again, like given the option, Georgia's looking at going, hey, Sankey, we couldn't flip these for 2025. We couldn't get South Carolina back and Vandy and the teams that aren't on the schedule. Right. So that's where I say it's a little bit, there are some people who are going to be screwed by this. But again, maybe they're looking and going, look, 10-2 gets you in the playoff anyway. So like, we're looking and going, hey, we got a tough schedule, but we win 10 games, we're back in the playoff anyway. So.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that I think is going to be most interesting out of this is how does this affect getting to the playoff? Because I think everyone just assumes if you're 10-2, you're getting in from the SEC. That's not. We don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know how many teams are going to get into the playoff this year with 12 teams, next year with 14. It'll be very interesting.
we might have 3 11-1 Big Ten teams. That could very well happen. All right, when we one more segment with our buddy Chris Marler, I want to touch on game times changing in the SEC. We'll talk about that. It's a little weird. We'll discuss that coming up next. All right, first, I want to remind you guys this episode presented to you by our friends over at Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, live games, to highlights, to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball, the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to make sure you have Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And that includes all of us at Locked On. Most of the big pro sports leagues out there, college conferences as well, Fire TV channels. We're going to let you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date with all the latest in the world of sports, from NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos. All of it is up there for you. Go check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked them out yet, trust us. Go learn more at Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That's Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. All right, one more segment with our buddy Chris Marler, and we talked about the report that came out. John Talty and Alex Scarborough, 24/7 Sports, reporting that the SEC is going to stick with 8 conference games in 2025, and it's not going to change opponents. But one of the other pieces they have in here is SEC games could start in atypical time slots. And I think they said specifically SEC network games. And the whole idea would be to kind of like stagger. So instead of doing the 11 a.m. Central, 12 Eastern kickoff on SEC network, they might push it back to like 12:45 Eastern. So 45 minutes later. They said the same thing for like the 4 o'clock Eastern game would be 4:15. And then the night game might be like a 7:45 Eastern as opposed to a 7 or something like that. So what do you make of the pushing game times back 45 minutes? Oh, wait, you were muted. Start over.
So I don't, it doesn't really move the needle for me. The only one that I think is interesting is the 12:45 one, because like there's something about like game day ends and you go right into a 12 o'clock game. I love that. You know what I miss more than anything with scheduling? Because most of the time that 12 o'clock game sucks, Gordy. Like they've kind of transitioned that with like the SEC network would always put the 4 o'clock game as like kind of like the crappiest game, because at 4 o'clock you had to compete with the 3:30 game on CBS, and it's like you're probably not going to compete with Bama Georgia, so you're going to give Arkansas Vandy on the 4 o'clock game. But just give me a 12:30 kickoff on Jefferson Pilot with all the Daves that I can handle. And like when game day ends, I can run up to the store, grab some beer, grab some food, come back, make it back in time for kickoff. Like that's all I want. I like 7:45, cool. I like that. That's fine. Like I think that feels like a primetime game, and also it's not gonna be super, super late at 8 o'clock. 4:15 does nothing for me. 4:15 does. I kind of hate it. There's no reason why. And there's like some old ass guy in like Wetumpka who's like, that's gonna be during supper time. I ain't gonna come on now.
Well, don't forget 3:30 on CBS. You're still gonna have like Illinois versus Rutgers to check.
And I'm gonna have to watch that now. That's why I'm most upset, is that I'm gonna be forced into watching bad Big Ten football against my will.
Or if Gary Danielson calling like, I don't know, Wisconsin versus Michigan State. You're like,
Gary probably made the schedule. Gary probably made the time slot just so he couldn't get he knows that SEC fans are still going to have to listen to him.
Yeah, it's just it's so weird, but I'm with you. Like, and keep in mind, like the schedule's going to change. Like we're so used to that 2:30 Central, 3:30 Eastern time slot being the prime game, and with this new contract, you're going to have more. Basically, they're saying like ABC night games are going to be, at least half of them this year are going to be SEC games, because they're going to be the biggest SEC game most likely, and then the big game on ESPN on Saturday night will be an SEC matchup, and then ESPN2 on top of the SEC network slate all day. So we're gonna have to get used to like the biggest game in the SEC. We could have the 2 biggest games at night going opposite each other on ABC and ESPN. So
I will say this is the one thing I hope that they are getting right, is like this is the one opportunity you have to do something for the fans, because that is the worst thing when it's like, why do I have both of the good games like on some of these like crappy Saturdays, on at the same time. Like, don't do that to me. Like, stagger them out. Let's be able to watch all the good stuff. So maybe that's what's happening.
All right, before we let you go, Marler, I wanted to hit on just a couple of the headlines going on around the conference. What do you make of the news? Big Kadyn Proctor leaves Alabama for Iowa, and after 3 months in Iowa, he says, "This ain't for me. I'm going back to Bama." What do you make of that?
Well, if you've been to Iowa, I think it kind of makes sense. I mean, I think this groceries in this economy have been outrageous, and I think that not having to feed Kadyn Proctor at 6'7", 340 pounds is probably a genius move from DeBoer. No, man, all jokes aside, like I'm happy he's going to be back on that Bama offensive line because they got gutted from the portal in general. But man, is this good for the sport? Is this really good for the sport? Like, to where this person can stay there for 1 year or less than a year, because I don't know if he was an early enrollee, leave at the start of spring semester, and then go take more money from another school, and then go back to the original school. Like you're starting to see, I think, some of these kids, like, they're not having to think through decisions that are important because they're just looking at how much money can I get. That's it.
Yeah.
It's almost like Nick Saban knew what he was talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, but again, he can't say that. When he says that on Capitol Hill, everybody goes, "You rich billionaire." Yeah. You can't say that. So one of the other tidbits, look, it's funny. We did our Ole Miss preview about a week or so ago, and like, Ole Miss is loaded. I'm worried about the running back spot. With Quinshot Judkins gone, like, I think Ulysses Bentley can be good. It sounds like Logan Diggs from LSU is not even going to, like, he's not going to be ready anytime soon. But what do you make of the rumbling that Henry Parish, former backup running back there, went to Miami? He's not at Miami now and looking like he's going to enter the portal and could end up back. I like that. At least gives them another option in the backfield. Yeah,
I think one of the things that was very underrated with that offense is that, like, they had a really, like, everyone thinks that offense, I think, is this high flying thing where you're throwing the ball because it's a Kiffin offense, you hurry up and you're all these explosive plays, and everyone knows Judkins. But man, Ulysses Bentley was such an underrated part of that offense. There's multiple games in the SEC, like one of them was LSU, which shouldn't count because that defense was terrible, but like where he averaged like 7 yards a carry. So you have this, not like a thunder and lightning, but you have a game breaker type back with Bentley. He's going to need some help though. I think that they're so deep on offense at the skill position anyway. It'll be interesting to see what the disbursement of touches and carries and receptions is going to be regardless.
All right, last one for you, Marler, as we get started with March Madness. Which have you looked at a bracket yet? And if you have, which SEC school is going to go the furthest this year?
Well, I think first off, you want to thank the committee for doing the right thing and rewarding Auburn for winning the SEC tournament. Like, that was really nice and sweet of them to put them in a bracket of 4 conference champions all the way up in Spokane. Which SEC team goes the furthest? I still think it's Auburn. I still think it's Auburn. I think, like, Bama's defense is so questionable. Tennessee is built to do it, but also, like, it's scary when Tennessee goes cold, because when they go cold, they almost lean on Dalton Connect too much. We saw it against Kentucky. We saw it in that first game in the SEC tournament. I worry about Tennessee because of March Rick Barnes. I tell you what, I brought this up last week. This is the last thing I'll say. Tennessee, if the AD is listening right now, and I know he is, a big fan of your show, who is saying you shouldn't just hire Rick Barnes to coach your team from November to February? Then go out and go get Buzz Aldridge or whatever, Buzz Williams from Texas A&M, and let him coach you in March. That needs to be the plan moving forward. But
or
yeah,
Buzz
I'm going to pick Auburn.
Buzz Aldrin could probably do it too. I think he died recently, but
is it Aldrin or Aldridge? I said it wrong twice. Yikes!
The astronaut is Buzz Aldrin.
He punched the guy in the face one time.
Buzz Aldridge is Lamarcus's less talented brother. But yeah, no, it's crazy. I have a bet with a friend. Is Tennessee going to make the Final Four this year? They've never been. Is this the year?
I don't know about all that. I do love the fact they're in Purdue's bracket, because, crazy enough, there's a lot of history with Tennessee getting screwed over at the hands of Purdue. So it could be a good revenge spot for the Volunteers.
I think, you know what? I think I have Alabama. Like, every time I fill out my bracket, I keep having Bama go far. I think because the expectations were so high on them last year and they underachieved. I feel like people have kind of, oh, well, Nate Oates, they probably don't go far this year. This might be the year they bust it and go through.
We'll see.
We'll see. All right. He is Chris Marler. Give him a follow on Twitter, his new Twitter account at Vern VRN Funquist CFB. You're gonna have to start adding numbers after this.
I know. It's gonna be awful.
Always good to catch up with you, Marler. We'll do it again real soon, and we'll talk again about how lazy. Look, Greg Sankey could have hired you to do the schedule. Hey, Marler, we'll pay you $1 million. Come up with our schedule plan.
For sure.
You know what? Hey, how's this? We take the same opponents and we flip them. How about that? Yeah,
I love it.
Now pay me for that. That would have been genius. All right, Marler. We'll talk again real soon, man. Thanks for the time.
Sounds good, brother.
All right. Thank you guys for watching Locked On SEC, making us your first listen every day. And hey, if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, if you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting going on, make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming sports channel program for you each and every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today can bring you that can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.